Another way to set up, to solve for the percentage of an amount is to set up a proportion. So in a percent proportion, one ratio of fraction compares part of a quantity to the whole quantity, and the other ratio is the equivalent percent written as a fraction with a denominator of 100. Because we're talking about percents, all percents are part of 100. So some people use this way to set up this little memory trick to set up our proportion. The is on the top part and the of is on the bottom part. And then percents always go over 100. So to see what we mean, we look at a problem. It says find 6% of 30. See that keyword 30? So the percent always goes over 100, except because we're writing it in fraction form, we don't need to write the percent there. And again, percents are always over 100. Now, we're finding 6%, so we need to know what is 6%, which means this is the number right across from it that represents 6%. If we're finding 6%, we don't know what it is, so we put our X there. So we're finding 6% of the total amount 30. So the of the total 30, that means your bottom is your total. I know that seems a little confusing, but once we do a few more problems, you'll get the hang of it. So we're going to cross multiply because these ratios are the same. We're allowed to do that. 6 times 30 is 180. X times 100 is 100x. This is a multiplication equation. How do you undo multiplication? You divide by 100. But remember, you have to do it on both sides. So x is going to equal 1.8. On our next one, it says 80 is 20%. Okay, 20%, percents always go over 100. It says 80 is 20, which means they should be on the same line. So here's 20. 80 is 20. And it says of what number? Of the total what number? I don't know what that total is. So that's the way I always read when I see of in these types of problems. I say of the total. Well, if I don't know what the total is, that's where my x goes. So when I cross multiply, I get 20x, and this gives me 8,000. How do I undo multiplication? With division. That goes away, and 800 divided by 2 is 400. So some teachers teach this as cross multiply and divide. That's what you're doing. You're cross multiplying, and then you end up dividing. I'm just showing you how to do it in an equation format because eventually it's not going to be just with simple numbers. You'll have other variables here. Now here's why cross multiplying and dividing works. Okay, so this means x divided by 30. So how do you undo division? With multiplication. This goes away and I have x left. And then I have 6 times 30. I'm not actually going to simplify that, but that goes on top. And 100 goes on the bottom. So 6 times 30 divided by 100. How do I undo division? With multiplication. So this goes away and I end up with 100x equals 6 times 30. What is 6 times 30? 180. This is exactly the same as what we wrote up here. So that's why cross multiply and divide works, because of this part here. Although I think just cross multiplying and dividing looks a lot less complicated. So here's another example. It says 16 is what percent? Okay, I don't know what the percent is, but I do know that percents are always over 100. Now it's telling me 16 is the percent. So this is my percent, is 16. So if it says 16 is the percent, that means they should be across from each other. Of, remember I always insert the total, of the total 40. Where do totals go? on the bottom. This is always your part. This is always your whole. Whole, in other words, total. So again, we're going to cross multiply to create our equation. And then we're going to divide to get rid of that multiplication. So x equals, that goes away, and I get 40. Be careful because this one was a percent. So my answer has to have a percent. Remember, a percent is not just a label. It actually has to be there to make the number correct. What is 75%? Okay, again, percents always go over 100. You should never miss that part. But it's asking, what is 75? So do I know what goes across from 75? No, that's what I'm looking for. Of the total 180, where do totals go? On the bottom. So I'm going to cross multiply to create my equation. And 180 times 75 is 13,500. And I don't expect you to know that off the top of your head, so you might have to do some side math. And then I'm going to divide to get rid of that multiplication. Zeros, I divided by 100. This is going to be 135. Next one says if 200 of the 550 reptiles in a zoo are on display, what percent of the reptiles are on display? Well, I don't know the percent. That's what's asking me for. But I do know percents are always over 100. The part goes on top, the whole goes on the bottom, because the percent is part of the total 100%, so we should put the part of the total number on top. 200 of 550, 200 is the part. 550 is all of them. We're going to cross multiply to get our equation. And then we have to divide by 550 to figure out what x is. This one did tell us to round to the nearest whole number. So when I divide this, I actually get 36.36 repeating. The nearest whole number would be 36, because that tells me to stay the same. Don't forget that this is a percent, so I need that on my answer. Next one says, if a box of brand A cereal contains 10 cups, how many more cups of cereal are in the box of brand B? When I look at my picture, here's brand A, which contains 10 cups. Brand B contains 30% more. So this is the total that's in this box. I need to figure out what 30% of this is, because that's what this has been increased by. So percents always go over 100. I need to figure out what 30% of 10 is. So 10 is that total. I need to figure that part out. 100x, 300, divide by 100, x equals 3. So how many more cups were there in a box of brand B? 3. The next one says 62 is 90.5. Okay, so percents always go under 100, and it says 62 is 90.5, so they should be across from each other. So when I cross multiply, I get 6,200 and 90.5x. Then I have to divide by 90.5 on both sides to come up with my value. This is going to give me 68.50, blah, 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 blah. Told me nearest tenth. So I look at the number behind it, and that tells me that my tenths place should stay the same. So my answer is 68.5. Last one. Of the 350 books on a bookshelf, of 45 are sci-fi. What percent are not sci-fi? Well, first of all, if there's 350 books and 45 are sci-fi, that means 305 are not. So I want to know a percent. Percents always go over 100. The total of the books is 350. What percentage do I want to know? The ones that aren't sci-fi. This is the ones that aren't sci-fi. So I'm going to cross multiply and divide. And that's going to give me 87.14, blah, 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 blah. And I'm going to round to the nearest whole percent. So this number right here tells me to stay the same. So about 87% of those books are not sci-fi. All right, so that's just another way to solve problems involving percents. Of course, you can always do it the simpler way when the numbers are easier, but sometimes you might actually have to use a proportion.